there's this guy, Conor Halbleib, who's like a Bernie kind of guy. He's the Democratic nominee in the 5th District of Kentucky for Congress. And it's a very long shot race, but this guy's great. I've like sacrifice a couple goats to whichever gods you believe in to get him to win. Despite it being a very long shot race. So I talked to him on my Callin show. And there was this interesting call that we got, because he said one of his major priorities was Medicare for all. And again, like, it would be amazing if this guy won, because he's like the incumbent he's running against is like, Mitch McConnell's, understudy in the House. Just real bad guy. But because he said that one of his main priorities was Medicare for all, we had this woman, Jenny, call in to argue with us about Medicare for all. So I wanted to just play a little bit of that. Great, and that's at 11 minutes, right? That's where I have it. Yeah, it's like a little past the 11-minute mark. Okay, great. And I have to say, Jay Andy, for your Type 5, that wasn't very funny, but it was very impactful. So I'll take it.
Yeah, so sorry about that.
Yeah.
There was something I just found out about, like that. This specific
No, appreciate
site,
it. Yeah,
so
it's stand up charity. All right,
yes.
Let's listen. But seriously, folks,
nursing shortages and general practitioner shortages. I mean, it all kind of comes together into a very complicated, big, but possible solution.
Gotcha. Okay, we've got a call from Jetty. Jetty, what's on your mind?
I just was wondering what you thought, Connor, about the fraud. There's so much fraud in Medicare, and it just feels like if that was to expand, I'm just not sure the government's able to deal with all the fraud. And well, it would be wonderful for everybody to have health care. I'm just concerned about that side of it.
Thank you, Jenny. I appreciate that. And you're right. There's a ton of fraud, and it's not a trivial problem. I mean, it affects people. But I think Ben has spoken on this before. Is that one of the reasons that fraud is able to persist, especially in the government realm? I mean, we obviously know that there's fraud in private insurance as well, but because we have a system that isn't a full system, that we've got these little pockets, little loopholes, there's all sorts of space for fraud to develop. If you have a system that's big but is simple, it actually would make things like fraud a lot harder, because we can see it all. Right now, you need so much administrative staff to do billing and this and that I think allows for a lot of this fraud to take place.
Yeah, that makes sense. That that if there's a single payer on the other end, that it's much easier to to keep track of. I think that's true. I mean, I think it would also be interesting to look at international comparisons, right? I mean, like, what's the sort of rate of medical fraud in like Canada versus the US? I mean, I assume that Americans aren't just like innately more corrupt people than Canadians, right? I mean, so like, whatever the difference is, it's about the system.
Right. Just making a system that's bigger isn't necessarily more complex. It's bigger. It's, takes a lot of energy, but it also means that we can control it actually easier. And so having a single payer system, I think it will eliminate all fraud. No, it won't. There will be fraud and everything,
Sure.
But think of the fraud in private insurance now. Put it all under one roof. It's a lot easier to monitor.
Yeah, I mean, I'd also point out, and I'll bring back Jenny if she had anything else she wanted to, any other thoughts about this. But I'd also point out that even though I think you're right, I actually do think it's true that that it'd be easier to crack down on fraud and abuse if it's centralized. So it's easier to track all of the information. I think that that makes sense to me. But I'd also point out that even if the opposite were true, right? Even if you were going to get more medical fraud, given Medicare for all, that, you still kind of have to make a choice about which problems you care the most about, right? Like, so, like, let's put the fraud issue even on that assumption, which again, I agree with you. I think the opposite's true, right? I think it'd be easier to crack down on it with Medicare for all, but like, even on the assumption that there was going to be more, right? We kind of put that in one column. We say, all right, so let's say for the sake of argument, right, there's increased fraud, and you're right. Clearly, that's not a trivial problem. That's resources that are wasted. They're going to that. But then in the other column, we put what you mentioned earlier, that the lack of stability, right? That every time you change jobs, right, you're changing health insurance. That your employer can change your health insurance at any time. That if you have, to that stability issue, I'd also add a sort of issue about just kind of personal freedom to live your life the way you want to live it. That there are people who stay in job, like people who are lucky enough to be employed at all. There are people who stay in jobs they absolutely hate because they don't want to take time off to like train for something else or anything like that because they would lose their health insurance. There are people who stay in bad marriages, because they don't want to lose their health insurance. And
Right.
then you just have the inevitable toll of people who don't, like people who are uninsured, who it doesn't have to be something big and dramatic, that but although the big dramatic stuff happens too. I mean, people die because their GoFundMe's for their insulin, aren't funded. But also, like, it just means that a lot fewer people go in for checkups, right? Because if you don't have insurance, or you don't have good insurance, and you're worried about how to be, co-pays and all of that stuff, then if you have something that like might be cancer and might be nothing, you're less likely to go in and get it checked out, because you've got that incentive not to, and inevitably people do die of that, right? I mean, like the rate of life expectancy and fit mortality, mortality amenable to healthcare are all better in like Canada or Great Britain than the US. So I mean, I would just I guess my last thought before we bring Jenny back in, would just be that, like, even if I thought that this was going to be a big concern, and I'm not saying don't take it seriously. I think you should take it seriously, but I would still say, like, you have to weigh that against all of these other things.
Well, yeah,
Could I share just a little bit of my story?
I'm good with that. I think Ben is too.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry, I muted myself. Yes, please do.
When I became very ill and had to be put on oxygen 10 years ago, it was just a matter of months before we lost our corporate job. And I've always thought that part of the reason my husband may have been let go was because my medical costs just went up significantly. And for 2 years, we were unemployed and then underemployed while he looked for another job. And so I lived for those 2 years without any health care. And it forced me to get into out of the box thinking and live my life in such a way that I never anticipated having to live. I always have to have an EpiPen on me. And it was right during the time when the EpiPens were $800-900 each. And it was just a very scary time. And then when he was able to get another job, of course, we got the healthcare back and it was great. But our oldest daughter had just aged out of being under that umbrella and had to go through a couple of years with nothing. And then she found one of these private clinics that don't require you to have any insurance. It's just doctors who set up their own private thing, and you pay $50 a month. And when you need some care, you go get it from them. And for her, she's 34. It's been a good fit. And the government didn't have anything to do with that. And it's just felt affordable and something that she could do. And so I understand the arguments for, just simplifying it and let the government pay for it. But because I've had these personal experiences with having to basically do my own healthcare with very serious autoimmune diseases, and I made it through. It was scary, but I made it. And then with my daughter, I'm just not certain that government paying for everything is the answer. So thoughts?
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think, like you said, you didn't know if if your health costs or if that had something to do with your husband and his job and the stress that brought upon you, and then your daughter and everything else, Ben can talk about this as well, but I'll just say that I don't see much difference between if the I think the private insurance can just as easily kind of screw people over as any sort of government program, and is the type of care or the type of payment system that the doctor that you spoke about, is that replicable for 350, 400 million people across the country? And I would still say that a single payer system supported and sponsored by the government that doesn't have the profit motive at play both solves the financial issues and, again, I think the health issues more than any patchwork system of private insurance companies. And we can just see the proof in the last 50 years, 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, listening to Jenny's story, I mean, what hits me is, like, almost everything about this. I mean, I'm really glad it worked out, but I mean, like, almost everything about that story, I think, kind of goes to why it's really bad that we do have this this patchwork system, that her husband's job, that there were adverse consequences to that, she suspects, because it's set up that way, because we have healthcare linked to employment, so I mean that wouldn't have happened if we had Medicare for all. Whatever sacrifices she was making in the intervening 2 years, I mean, again, I'm glad it worked out, but what I would question is just, like, should you have had to do that, right? Or would it be better, right, if people kind of have that foundation as they're living their lives, that like that's just kind of off the table, that's taken care of. It's like the same way that if you have, if we made people, if we didn't have public schools, or we only had private schools, you had to pay tuition to send your kid to public school, that, like, if there's a story about how, like, that was going to be a problem, but you figured it out, and then eventually you found, like, a school with reasonable tuition rates or something, okay, that's good. But, like, is it good that as a society we take that off the table, or we take off, like, police and fire protection, that that you don't have to worry about how you're going to pay for that month to month, or have it paid for through your job or anything like that, that's just off the table. And I would say, like, again, that's great that your daughter, after she aged out, I mean, did find a doctor, clinic that worked for her, that that was charging something she could afford. But that shouldn't even be a question, right? Like should it be that you have to worry about, like, well, can I, this particular person is okay because they found something that worked for them, that, like, isn't charging more than they can afford, and doesn't require health insurance and all that stuff. But what if, but of course, I mean, that took a while to find, right? I mean, you didn't find that to meet your needs, in those 2 years between. And, like, the best solution for you is made back on, your husband's, health insurance, get employer health insurance. Like, I would just question whether anybody should have to find one of these private fixes, or whether it would be better for everybody. It'd be better as a society if that was just something that you didn't have to worry about it that way.
Well, 2 weeks to the day after my husband was laid off, the Apria company came and took my oxygen equipment away. And
That's horrible.
I was back down in the 80s, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. And during those 2 weeks, I had made it a matter of prayer. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I was able to get my hands on a concentrator that I just purchased myself with some of the severance money. And that was the ticket to me being able to just survive. Because when your oxygen's chronically in the 80s, everything is just broken in your body. And that little concentrator kept me in the high 90s for years. And interestingly enough, once we got the insurance, I wanted to get a new machine. And my insurance company said no. They were so vested in that old technology and the refill tanks and the oxygen people having to lug around their tanks. They were not willing to pay for this new sophisticated technology that was just kind of, I just fell into it. Like I said, I think it was a miracle from God. But since then, I felt more empowered because I owned my own equipment. And when the time came for us to upgrade, we just did it on a payment plan and spent the money. It's very expensive, but I feel more empowered because of those 2 years than if I had been on the Apria old concentrator for the last 10 years, which, if things had been right and they'd been able to hold on to the job, that's what I would have done and very comfortably been on it. But like I said, I feel more empowered to own my own equipment. And so it was kind of a blessing in disguise. I know there's no easy answers for all this, but I just almost feel like we would be lying to people to say that if we had
Yes, there
Medicare
are.
for all, they would get 21st century top American first world care, when we all know that that would not shake out. And so I just
Why
feel
do
like
we know that?
because we can't afford it.
Well,
I think that obviously you can never know anything, but I think the thing to do is to look at comparables, and you would see that people in other countries that are comparable, are rich countries that are very, first world countries, they do a really good job, and nothing's perfect, and they've got their problems and everything. But at the end of the day, those the people in those countries feel that I just don't think that having people struggle for years and years on end on the hopes that maybe they break through the system. As a politician and someone who wants to represent at the federal government level, I don't think that's the right way to do things. I think if those 2 years, if you had what you needed, I would say people's lives, I think, would be easier, and that's what I'm trying to accomplish.
yeah, I
It
would
was
also.
definitely a
Oh,
layer
sorry.
of stress, that I wouldn't wish on
Yes.
anybody. Because when you're sick and you can't breathe, it's an emergency. And so, it was very difficult to live through those 2 years. My point is that, for other people who have similar health conditions that are deadly, the anaphylactic shock that I struggle with when I get exposed to certain things, our
Yeah.
lives feel tenuous anyway, even with insurance. And so to have it all jacked up to that next level is scary. But I made it through, and I'm getting older. I'm a grandma, and my bottom line point is, when you do too much for people, sometimes that can create some problems and some unintended consequences. And so a little bit of tough love and saying, let's own our health, let's do better with our own personal care. I get very serious about exercise and diet during those 2 years. And it was just a chance for me to really reassess what my goals were. And I just, I wish you well. I'm not telling you what to do or what to think, but I just thought my story might have some value.
All right. Well, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jenny.
I appreciate that, Jenny. I do want to move on to the next caller, but I did just kind of want to say one thing that, about Jenny's story, which is that what she's describing. Again, I'm really really happy that it worked out for her, but I think as she describes it, it sounds like it wouldn't necessarily work out for everybody in those circumstances. That, like, part of the payments, the expensive payments, she said, for the new machine that they owned, that they could do that with the severance money. But of course, not everybody, if you're like a gig economy worker, you're not, you lose your job, you're not going to have any severance money, right? That's,
Well, there were, I bet, a lot of people who were in Jenny's situation, and again, thank God she was able to do it. But there were a lot of people who aren't here today who couldn't make it through.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, like, if you're like an Uber driver or something, and you like, I mean, there's no, there's no severance money. There are lots and lots of situations where you wouldn't have that.
Well, and the fact that in this day and age that anyone has to deal with someone maybe literally ripping an oxygen tank, like, out of their nose and everything, because just for the ability to not pay, when we could solve that issue. I mean, that issue could be solved. Like, that's disgusting, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and I would also just point out, in terms of the idea that we wouldn't be able to afford to have 21st century, American style healthcare, that I would just say on that, that if you, I mean, if you actually look at the numbers, I mean, I know it's counterintuitive to a lot of people, but, like, it's more cost efficient to do it this way, because to have Medicare for all. I mean,
Right.
like if you look at the international comparisons, the United States spends, like people spend more on, on healthcare, like, and collectively as a society, we spend more on
Mhm.
healthcare and get worse outcomes, right? Again, life expectancy,
Right.
infant mortality, all that stuff, than many other comparable societies. And if you have, um, and if you had healthcare paid for out, out of progressive taxation, then the most, middle income people who have insurance right now
Right.
would actually be paying significantly less, because it all goes into one pool. None of the money
Right.
is going into insurance industry. Yeah, that's probably a good cutoff point. So I did, I will say, actually, later in the episode, somebody called in to be like, why were you so nice to her? And I basically made the point that it's like, look, this is not a health insurance executive, right? This is just some regular person who has actually gone through a lot, and who has unfortunately kind of done this post hoc rationalization thing where, like, it all has to have been meaningful in some way to have to go through all of that. And and so maybe there's this, maybe it's a blessing in disguise somehow, which is very which is a very unfortunate way of thinking, I think, right? But this is a victim of the healthcare system who's rationalizing what happened to her, right? I mean, this isn't one of the perpetrators of it. But it's, and also, frankly, I know, there are people in my life, I mentioned on the Callin episode, who would probably nod along, with a lot of the things that Jenny says in that call, right? I think you have to be able to talk to people who have, who have accepted this view of things, and and sometimes it works, right? I mean, my favorite example for that current affairs interview with one of the Amazon labor organizers from Staten Island, about how one of the most effective organizers was this Italian American Trump voter, Uncle Pat, who wasn't even a supportive of the union effort, and sort of came around midway through. That, like, again, you gotta make friend enemy distinctions here. But you guys have any thoughts about this before we go to the next thing?
I really dislike the whole thought of like people have to suffer to become better. It's like life's always going to throw you something that's gonna make you suffer, and so if she had insurance back then, that 2 years of her husband being out of work sounded like hell.
Mm.
Um, that there probably would have been other problems too. If she had her medical situation taken care of, that time probably would have been spent, with other struggles that would have made her a better person, as she's kind of rationalizes. But and I'm not trying to put her down by that, saying that, but like it just, you know, there are, if you can fill, if there's a way we can fill people's needs of like basic stuff, yeah, there's always going to be struggle in life, so you don't have to worry, make that argument of let the people struggle and they will become more powerful, or whatever. I know I'm kind of building it up into something like much more comic booky than she actually said, but that's where my mind goes, people.
The only thing I'd add is I don't deploy this argument that often, but I think if you're really saying, especially, whatever, Ben can say whatever he wants, but he's a politician, right, running for office. I think if he's talking to a U.S. citizen who's talking about her near-death experience and what she thinks about that, and you think that he should have like really come down hard on her and like really use some sick debate tactics to own her, I think you need to go outside. Just get off the internet and go outside and, I don't know, go to a restaurant.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive post-games on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.